I wasn't expecting that, but that's great. Thank you. I was going to say, all right, I thought it wasn't on, and I thought it was. Good morning.
Good morning.
Please turn your attention to our gathering music.
Good morning and welcome to the Humboldt Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, an open-minded, open-hearted spiritual home to everyone who values acceptance for all people and care for all life on earth. I'm Ann Huffman, your worship associate today, and whether in person or online, we're very glad you're here. We also want to acknowledge that we gather on the unceded ancestral lands of our brothers and sisters, the Weats. To those here in person, thank you for doing your part to keep our community safe at this challenging time by remaining masked and observing social distancing while on this grounds. The sound of the bell now calls us to a spirit of reverence.
Good morning. Each Sunday we light a chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. Our accompanying words today are adapted from reading number 434 in our Singing the Living Tradition hymnal. Sacred Spirit of our radically interconnected existence and our deeply intertwined lives, help us to remember here our highest aspirations. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to the communion of all life, and to each other. In kindling our Unitarian Universalist flame, we invoke and invite into this space the divine light of wisdom and the sacred fire of justice and compassion, and dedicate ourselves anew to bringing our fullest gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. Every week, we also renew our commitment to this fellowship's foundational aspiration. Please join me in these words as printed in your order of service. May love be the spirit of this fellowship. May the quest for truth be its sacrament, and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration. Now is the time specially set aside for the youth in our congregation, and we invite the children to come forward for today's activity. Parents and caregivers are also welcome, or anyone who's particularly feeling young at heart on this beautiful morning. So come on up, folks. And that includes some extra people today. I'm going to put my mask back on. Come on up and have a seat or. Good morning. How are you? Nice to see you. How are you? Hi. Yeah, what a beautiful morning, huh? It's nice to have you here. And today we're going to do a very short play, or could call it a skit. And it's called A Play About King John Sigismund, the only Unitarian king. Did you know there was a Unitarian king at one time? Well, I didn't either until a little while ago. This play was written by Unitarian Universalist Association staff member Jan Gartner, who adapted it from the story A Unitarian King in a book called A Lamp in Every Corner, a Unitarian Universalist storybook by Janine K. Grossmeyer. I've done a little minor adapting, very little. Besides myself, our cast today includes Huff's Director of Lifespan Religious Exploration, Amy Day, Huff co-president David Marshak, and fresh off his best supporting Pelican appearance at the Halloween Festival, Greg Blomstrom. Joanne Huffman is our narrator. So listen up, here we go with the story.
Our story takes place in the mid-1500s in the country of Hungary. Queen Isabella has just had a baby boy. Her husband, King John, is away fighting.
Hungary is such a sad place to live right now. Everyone's fighting. My husband fights with kings from other countries. Groups of people within Hungary are fighting with other groups of people. A lot of the warring is about religion. I wish King John would stop fighting and come home to see our baby. I wish people would talk about their differences instead of trying to kill each other over them.
Unfortunately, King John died just 2 weeks after the baby was born. He never saw his son. Little baby Prince John Sigismund became the new king of Hungary.
All hail King John Sigismund of Hungary.
Well, King John Sigismund was obviously way too young to run a country. Kings from other countries took most of Hungary away from John Sigismund and kept it for themselves.
I'm taking my baby to live in a small corner of the kingdom called Transylvania. I will teach him to be a wise ruler, and I will help him put an end to all the fighting.
While the young king was growing up, the wars continued. In Transylvania, the followers of different religions kept fighting with each other. Queen Isabella died when King John Sigismund was 19 years old. It was now all up to him to try to stop the wars.
What should we do? How can we stop the fighting?
One king, one country, one religion, just as they do in France and Spain. We must choose one religion for Transylvania. Everyone will have to follow it, and then we will have no more fighting.
I don't know. You know, my dear mother taught me that people should try to solve their differences by talking. I wonder, what if I invited people from different religions to my court to talk together?
And that's just what he did. King John Sigismund invited a number of preachers to his court for a conversation about religion.
I'm a Calvinist preacher.
I'm a Catholic preacher. I am a Lutheran preacher. I'm a Greek Orthodox preacher.
I'm Francis David. I'm a Christian who believes that God is one, not three. Since I think God is a unity, not a trinity, some people call me a Unitarian.
Of course, preachers are great talkers. They talked on and on and on and on for days. Sometimes they argued, but they didn't fight.
Wow. I'm really impressed with Francis David, the Unitarian. He makes a lot of sense to me. I think I'm going to become a Unitarian too.
I say one king, one country, one religion.
I say we need not think alike to love alike.
I say one king, one country, one religion.
We need not think alike to love alike.
Well, I could do what the nobles suggested and make everyone in Transylvania become Unitarian, like Francis David and me. But one of the things I like best about Francis David is that he says we don't need to all think alike.
King John Sigismund thought hard about what to do. He was still just a young man, and he had a big decision to make. Should he demand that everyone practice the religion he had chosen for his own, or should he let everyone choose for themselves?
On this day in 1568, I hereby issue an edict of religious toleration. I proclaim that every person can follow the religion of their own choosing. No one shall be reviled for their religion by anyone else. Francis David, I invite you to remain here to be my court preacher.
This edict or special law was the first of its kind in history. In 1569, King John Sigismund and most of his court converted to Unitarianism. And on January 14th, 1571, the king declared Unitarianism an original religion of his faith in Transylvania. But this was not quite a happily ever after story. King John Sigismund died at age 31 following a carriage accident. After his death, Unitarians were not always tolerated. Francis David was eventually imprisoned for his ideas, and he died in a dungeon. But because of King John Sigismund and Francis David, Unitarians and Unitarian faith have remained strong in Transylvania for over 400 years. Unitarianism began with beliefs about the unity of God, and starting with the 1568 Edict of Religious Toleration, continues to stand for religious freedom and open-mindedness. That ends our play today. Cast members, please take a bow. We use song.
So you can sit down. David Marshak let me know this morning that he has a little interesting addendum to our story.
So many of you know that I worked at the UA through most of the 1980s. And one of the fascinating things about that time was that although there had been letters that had gone back and forth between Unitarian Universalists in the United States and Unitarian Universalists in Transylvania, in the early, I think it was 1983, both the president and vice president of the UA traveled to Transylvania for the first time and actually met Unitarians there and spent time. And it was particularly fraught because most of you were around then and know that Romania was ruled by Nicolae Ceausescu in the 1980s still, who was a very brutal communist dictator. But he did allow the American Unitarians to come in and spend several weeks with Romanian Unitarians. So you can imagine they had maintained Unitarianism from 1560 and still do to this day.
Thank you, David, and thank you all cast members. We use song to usher our children into the care of their religious exploration teachers. The lyrics are printed in your order of service. We're not singing out with full voice today, but please feel free to hum along or sing very softly as we send our kids into their own sacred space. Needed to unmute the Zoom, a little tech thing there. Yes, we've come to our joys and concerns time, sometimes known as joys and sorrows. And I have one little sorrow today I want to start with, first of all, which is to say the last three services all ran substantially long, and they were coordinated by three different people, and last week mine. And I'm sorry for that. We want to respect, as worship leaders, we want to respect your time and your expectations. There were some reasons for that, including last week, one of the main microphone deciding to take Day of the Dead literally and expire just as the service was about to start. So still myself and the worship team want to respect that, and we will scale back. Our goal is 60 to 70 minutes with leaning toward the shorter end of that. So we beg your pardon. And as I now move into joys and concerns, it helps if you also keep your sharing relatively brief and from the heart, no announcements, no proposals, etc. Those are other places for those. So with that, we are a welcoming congregation and intend that every person who joins us feels seen and held in this sacred space. One way we do this is by honoring any joys or concerns we carry in our hearts and spirits. So one at a time, those who wish to may come forward to take a pebble or pebbles from the bowl, and step to the microphone, lower your mask, please share your name and your brief personal joy or concern, then drop your pebble or pebbles into the bowl of water. The ripples formed represent how our cares and prayers move out into the world, touching others. You can also drop one or more pebbles and not say anything, but just spend a few moments with your thoughts or prayers. Also, if this is your first time or two with us, or time or few, I really should say, if you feel comfortable doing so, please feel free to come up and just tell us your name and a little bit about yourself if you like, or what brought you here. And if you have that information online, please put it in the chat and we can share it as well. Once again, take one or more pebbles, share verbally if you care to, and then drop your pebble or pebbles. Let us begin.
Hi, I'm Debbie. I have 3 first cousins, and I'm only close to one of them. And she is really in the midst of a pretty scary health crisis, so I'm just really concerned about her.
Hi, I'm Sally. Just for those of you who've been following along, I wanted to report that my friend Al, who spent a month at Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital with Guillain-Barré syndrome, has now been breathing on his own comfortably for a couple of weeks, and he has been transferred to skilled care in Sonoma. I'll be going down to visit him on Friday for a few days, and my biggest job is to help him not use the words "I can't" so often.
This is a note of joy. There's 3 in our household, and we've worked very hard to be a team. It is so hard, as you notice, with your own households, that teamwork is difficult because you all have different points of view and things that you'd like to have happen. But in our case, we've gotten through the arguments and then arrived on the other side with, well, look at, we're here today. And so here we are, the same one that we had before. We've attained a lot of things, and I believe we're going to attain more. And if it comes to the end for one of us, we'll understand that too. We're talking a lot about that. I loved last week's ceremony in which we talked a lot about dealing with death and the afterlife. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Scarlett Tripsmith. I'm the technical coordinator for Huff, and I will be sharing the Zoom joys and sorrows with you all today on this beautiful Sunday. So to start us off, we have Sue Lee Mossman. Thank you to Joanna Welsh, Bridget Verity, Sylvia Shaw, and Margie Emerson. The CAC banner was displayed at yesterday's climate rally to seek global action for climate justice outside the Humboldt County Courthouse. Thanks to all the fellowship members who attended in solidarity. Another one from Sue Lee Mossman. Thank you and deepest appreciations from Archie and me to all for your emails, cards, texts, and to send healing thoughts and concerns and love this past week. Our granddaughter is better and we're sending healing thoughts for continued progress in regaining wholeness of body, mind, and spirit. From Tom Lewis, for the resilience of children, especially my granddaughter Cora. From Ursula Osborne, Pat and I have welcomed a new pet into our home from the Humboldt County shelter named Lotta. She's a Lotta dog in a little package. From John Schaefer, my friend, Mr. Arthur McDonald, is home from treatment at Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital. He was kidnapped, assaulted, and left in a field a few weeks ago. And that's all from the Zoom. Joys and sorrows. Thanks for listening.
We hold in our care all that has been shared today and know that some things are so large, so fresh, or so fragile that tending to them inwardly seems best at this time. We also hold these tender truths in our hearts and drop one last pebble for all the unspoken joys and concerns that connect our beloved community. We'll follow this with a minute or so of silence, during which you may add any more unspoken cares or prayers.
Today's reading is number 647 in our Singing in the Living Tradition hymnal. It's by Waldemar Argow and is entitled An Eternal Verity. Ancient as the home is the temple. Ancient as the workbench is the altar. Ancient as the sword is the sacrificial fire. Ancient as the soldier is the priest. Older than written language is spoken prayer. Older than painting is the thought of a nameless one. Religion is the first and last, the universal language of the human heart. Differing words describe the outward appearance of things. Diverse symbols represent that which stands beyond and within. Yet, every person's hunger is the same, and heart communicates with heart. Ever the vision leads on with many gods or with one, with a holy land washed by ocean waters, or a holy land within the heart. In temperament we differ, yet we are dedicated to one august destiny. Creeds divide us, but we share a common quest. Because we are human, we shall ever build our altars. Because each has a holy yearning, we offer everywhere our prayers and anthems. For an eternal verity abides between diversities. We are children of one great love, united in our one eternal family. Here ends the reading.
Been sitting a little while, so let's move a moment with a super simple Tai Chi-like exercise that we did back in September. All we do is turn our palms up And we pull energy from the earth, raise our arms as high as is comfortable. Don't hurt your shoulders. While inhaling deeply, and then turn your palms down and exhale. So the idea is to pull in energies of positivity and strength and nourishment, and to release anything that we don't need at this time. So staying seated is fine. You can absolutely do this seated, but I invite you to rise in body or in spirit, just to get our bodies moving, blood moving a little bit. If you're near the edge of an awning, please be careful as you raise your arms. And as we go, we'll just do a few, and I will say a few words to accompany us. So once again, first without words, take a deep breath, pulling the energies in from the earth, turn our hands over, exhale what we don't need. So inhale peace. Exhale agitation. Inhale being fully present. Exhale any mental chatter. Inhale gratefulness. Exhale cynicism. Inhale faith. Exhale doubt. Last verbal one, inhale joyfulness. You could even smile behind your mask. Exhale pessimism. One last one in silence. And with hands together over our hearts, we offer a little closing bow of thanks to this shared sacred moment and the Spirit. Thank you. Please be seated. I didn't mean to be the king of joys and concerns a few minutes ago. I forgot to take my crown off. Oh, thank you. Maybe I'll make it a regular thing. Yeah. No, people might get the wrong idea. Yeah, right. Okay, so I was going to say it's a touch cool today, but actually it's quite, at least in the sun, it's quite pleasant and toasty, isn't it? And it's such a beautiful day, and I would suggest that in a way sometimes we might want it a little warmer, at least a little warmer than it was the last couple of days, but we wouldn't want things to get so hot as they once got for a man named Michael Servetus. That's Servetus, Michael Servetus, born a Spanish Catholic around 1506. In the year 1531, so about age 25, Michael Servetus published a theological treatise entitled De Trinitatis Erroribus, or in English, On the Errors of the Trinity. During the midst of the Inquisition, during the midst of the Inquisition, you might imagine a book of this title raising more than one heretic hunter's eyebrows. And indeed, the following year, the Supreme Council of the Inquisition in Spain begins proceedings against Servetus, forcing him into hiding to avoid interrogation. Surfacing in Paris as Michel de Villeneuve, he studies mathematics and medicine, and around 1540, close to 10 years after his book is published, he becomes the personal physician of the Archbishop of Vienna. Not a bad gig in those days. Things are now serene until in 1546, Servetus makes the mistake of renewing a secret correspondence with an old acquaintance, John Calvin. At one time, Calvin had also needed to lay low because of his Protestant writings, but had now ascended to the unquestioned leadership of the Reformed Protestants in Geneva. Servetus sends Calvin a preview of his latest book, a major work called The Restoration of Christianity. Calvin, in turn, sends Servetus a copy of his book, Institutions of the Christian Religion, which forms the basis for the theology known as Calvinism. With titles like these banging against each other, you can guess this isn't going to turn out well for somebody. And sure enough, after a long period of lambasting each other's theologies via mail, finally Calvin can't take no more. And after cutting off their correspondence, he writes to a colleague that if Servetus ever comes to Geneva, if my authority is of any avail, I will not suffer him to get out alive. I couldn't help be reminded of a Monty Python and the Holy Grail little bit, where the Knights of Ni are telling King Arthur and his men, you must return here with a shrubbery or else you will never pass through this wood alive. But to reflect seriously for a moment, does anyone besides me shake their head at the gap between Calvin's statement and the teachings of Rabbi Jesus on love and forgiveness? Plus the fact that Jesus was put to death for his teachings, and here Calvin now wants to do the same to Michael Servetus. If one refers to Jesus as Christ, he and John Calvin share the same initials, but spiritually they are galaxies apart. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, deadly dueling theologies. So Calvin is fed up. And when Servetus publishes his Restoration of Christianity in early 1553, Calvin leaks Michel de Villeneuve's true identity to the French Inquisition in Vienna. Captured there and interrogated in prison, things aren't looking too hot for Mike. Or with being burned at the stake, a distinct possibility now, I should say they're looking a bit too hot. But believe it or not, he somehow manages to escape those crafty Unitarians. But the next plot twist has historians befuddled, because while fleeing France, some scholars speculate towards northern Italy or southwestern Switzerland, where he may have hoped to find a more receptive climate, Servetus crosses the border into Geneva and is recognized at a church service. Talk about being faithful to a fault. Arrested and tried for heresy under Calvin's prosecution, the Council of Geneva convicts Servetus of anti-Trinitarianism and opposition to child baptism. Perhaps out of a begrudging respect, Calvin requests that Servetus be mercifully beheaded. The council, however, apparently not also recalling too good their declared Lord's teachings, decrees that he will be burned at the stake. So the heat finally catches up to Michael Servetus, and on October 27th, 1553, he is burned alive along with his notorious books. Not a real promising start to the Unitarian faith. Though strictly speaking, Servetus wasn't a pure Unitarian because he sought to radically redefine common conceptions surrounding the doctrine of the Trinity, not abolish it altogether. But he's a foundational figure nonetheless, both theologically and politically. One source encapsulated his religious views this way. Servetus had no use for the doctrine of original sin and the entire theory of salvation based upon it, including the doctrines of Jesus's dual nature and the vicarious atonement effected by his death. Nor did Servetus restrict the benefits of faith to a few recipients of God's parsimonious dispensation of grace, as did Calvin's doctrine of the elect. Rather, grace abounds, and human beings need only the intelligence and free will, which all possess, to grasp it. To me, this carries important seeds of both Unitarian and Universalist thought that would blossom in future years. On the political side, Calvin and his council encountered significant public flack after executing Servetus. This emboldened other heretical reformers of the time, and Servetus's thought and martyrdom influences someone named George Biandrata, physician to, where is it? Where's my crown? King John Sigismund of Transylvania. Biandrata in turn influences the former Catholic we met in our all ages skit, Francis David, whose theological reasonings concerning the doctrine of the Trinity persuade the king to convert to Unitarianism. And it was just 15 years after Servetus's death that, as we heard, in 1568, the king issued a strong edict of religious toleration known as the Edict of Torda, T-O-R-D-A, that's the name of the town. I found that one good way to remember that momentous year is to think of the equally tolerant 1968 Summer of Love and subtract 400. And I want to emphasize what a progressive anomaly this edict was, coming as it did amid the near constant religious warfare raging throughout much of Europe. It wasn't perfect. Legal guarantees applied to Roman Catholics, Lutherans, Calvinists, and Unitarians, while other groups such as Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Orthodox adherents that comprised over half the population were merely tolerated. And as we heard, unfortunately, but perhaps predictably, King John Sigismund's Unitarian sympathies didn't extend to his Catholic successor. That person rescinded the edict and tossed Francis David in prison, where he became ill and died a year later. Still, in keeping with our November theme of holding history, by repudiating the establishment of a single mandatory national religion, the first separation of church and state in a way, the Edict of Torah was an historically significant statement of religious freedom and acceptance that helped make possible the development of modern liberal religion, which includes us. Of course, since then, many people have carried the same progressive torch of inclusion and tolerance, and each of their stories deserves to be told. But I only have time to share one more, so I'm going to leapfrog 3 centuries, 1 ocean, and a multitude of true giants of our now unified Unitarian and Universalist faith traditions to the United States in the mid-1800s. It was here that Olympia Brown, in applying for admission to theological schools in order to become a minister, was told by the Unitarian School of Meadville, Pennsylvania, that, quote, the trustees thought it would be too great an experiment to admit a woman. Oberlin replied that they would admit Miss Brown, but she could not participate in what they termed public exercises. I can't figure what Oberlin had against women doing jumping jacks in the quad, but it was a different time. Finally, Ebenezer Fisher, president of the Universalist Divinity School of St. Lawrence University, offered her admission, but added that he, quote, did not think women were called to the ministry, but he added, I leave that between you and the great head of the church. This, to now quote Olympia Brown, was exactly where it should be left. That's her words. This is exactly where that should be left. But she continues, when I arrived, though, I was told I had not been expected and that Mr. Fisher had said I would not come, as he had written so discouragingly to me. I had supposed his discouragement was my encouragement. Such was the spirit of Olympia Brown. Completing her studies in 1863, she became the first female graduate of an established theological school. But she then had to persuade the male ministers to ordain her, which would allow her to be called to a parish. Despite substantial opposition, Olympia Brown again triumphed, and in her subsequent ordination as a Universalist minister made her the first woman to achieve full ministerial standing in any denomination. There's a celebration of that going on. I like it. Yeah, people are breaking into song. All right, so that's what happened. First woman in any denomination. So I want to say, listen, from the Unitarian king in 1568 to Universalist Olympia Brown in 1863, were we breaking down barriers even then or what? Yeah. Can I get an amen? Yeah. Can I get an a woman? Yeah. Can I get an a anywhere between or beyond? Thanks for trying. So in 1864, Brown was called to her first full-time parish ministry in Weymouth Landing, Massachusetts. Here she first became active in the women's rights movement, working with Susan B. Anthony, Lucy Stone, and other leaders. In the summer of 1868, she was asked to campaign in Kansas for passage of a women's suffrage amendment, and her parish gave her a 4-month leave of absence to enable this. Huff board members, please make a note of this for future reference. Assured that all the logistical arrangements for her campaign would be made, she arrived in Kansas to find instead that she had to arrange her own travel, find lodgings in each town, secure the speaking halls, and advertise her engagements, and often face down hecklers who wanted to discredit her and her cause. But Brown persevered and delivered more than 300 speeches. And despite just 1/3 of the all-male voting population approving the amendment, Susan B. Anthony considered Brown's work an unqualified success. Sometimes we win without winning. Olympia Brown went on to marry and have 2 children and served churches in Bridgeport, Connecticut and Racine, Wisconsin. And though she felt like the suffrage movement's fire had dwindled to mere ashes as older suffragists died or withdrew, her commitment never wavered. So 47 years later, 47 years, when Alice Paul and Lucy Barnes started the more militant Women's Party in 1913, Brown's fire was rekindled. Asked to be a charter member, she stated, "I belonged to this party before I was born." Before long, protesting Woodrow Wilson's failure to back a suffrage amendment, she was burning his speeches in front of the White House. When the suffrage amendment was finally passed in 1919, Olympia Brown was one of the few original suffragists still alive to relish the victory. She voted in her first presidential election at age 85. How about a woman for that? In 1920, speaking in the Racine church that now bears her name, she said, "The grandest thing has been the lifting up of the gates and the opening of the doors to the women of America, thus opening to them a new and larger life and a higher ideal." Following the suffrage victory, Brown worked for the cause of world peace, becoming one of the original members of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. She died in 1926 at age 91. In 1963, honoring the centennial of her ordination, the theological school at St. Lawrence University unveiled a plaque in her honor, which read in part, "Preacher of Universalism, pioneer and champion of women's citizenship rights, forerunner of the new era, the flame of her spirit still burns today." I didn't intend it, but we seem to have this fire theme going. And while I'm fired up to share more stories about people on whose shoulders we are privileged to stand here today, I may do so in the future. For now, I'll need to stop there with stories and move into just 2 closing thoughts about history in general. One, in telling stories about people who have led their lives with some measure of extraordinariness, there can be a tendency to think of them as imperturbable, as somehow above and beyond the pain and fears and doubts that plague the rest of us mere mortals. But that may do both them and us a disservice because it minimizes their humanity. Merely because of her gender, Olympia Brown faced professional rejection and marginalization her whole life. Of her career as a parish minister, she wrote, "The pulpits of all the prosperous churches were already occupied by men. All I could do was to take some place that had been abandoned by others and make something of it." And Michael Servetus, reporting later of when he first learned of being summoned by the Supreme Council of the Inquisition, wrote, "I was hunted far and wide that I might be seized and put to death." And I think it's important to realize that he felt those terrible flames as acutely as any of us would. So when I consider what these and so many other people endured for their principles, I am humbled. Yet in recognizing the normal human frailties behind the historical facades, it helps me better face my own challenges. The second thing is that historical amnesia has a price. Not only because, as George Santayana famously wrote in 1905, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, but also because if we don't know where we've been, we don't really know who we are and where we're headed, or at least we don't know it as richly and as powerfully. A study published by the New York Times suggests that children who know something about their family's history may be more resilient in the face of challenges than kids who don't. Why? Because they have what the researchers called a strong intergenerational self. They are connected to those who have gone before them. They know they belong to something bigger than themselves or even themselves and their nuclear family. So do we as UUs belong to something bigger than ourselves and bigger than this particular fellowship family. We belong to a long-standing and large family of faith and to an intergenerational lineage of expansive love and justice making. As our UU forebears proclaimed greater freedom and tolerance, so do we. As the flame of Olympia Brown's spirit still burns, so does our chalice, and so do our hearts. as those before us have envisioned and worked to build a brighter and fairer world. Inspired by their courage and humanity, so do we. Because as Unitarian Universalists, we know that the last two lines of our earlier reading are true. For an eternal verity abides beneath diversities. We are children of one great love, united in our one eternal family. Blessed be, and amen.
We come to this fellowship because we love what exists here. It is a living entity, and like all living things, needs nurture and sustenance. Its breath and heartbeat, its life itself, is only derived from its living components, us. For those with us online, and we're glad you are, there's a slide that provides options on how to contribute to the fellowship's financial health. For those here, for safety's sake, we're not passing an offering basket. So if you have Venmo on your phone, you can scan the QR code on your order of service to donate. Or you may drop a check or cash into the basket at the exit doors as you depart today. Please make checks out to HUUF, Huff. And again, please drop those as you depart, not right now. As an opportunity to practice the spiritual art of generosity, this morning's offering will now be gratefully received as Annette Gurnee Hull blesses us with music.
Thank you, Annette. I thank you, Jim Scott, the composer. I know that many of us would have loved to sing along loudly to gather the spirit, but I appreciate your forbearance for the good of our public health. We are grateful for the gifts received today and for all the gifts and blessings in our lives. If you're visiting with us today, that's a special gift in itself. We again extend an especially warm welcome to you, and I'd be honored to meet you after we are done because you are our special guest. Also recall that though we're outside in such a gorgeous day today, as the weather likely moves us indoors more and more on coming Sundays, seating will be limited in order to maintain social distancing indoors. So if you plan to attend in person, it's important to reserve a spot ahead of time, or you may end up in overflow seating in the foyer. You can sign up by going to huff.org and clicking on the link at the top of the homepage, or you can contact our congregational administrator, Bridget Garrudi, and ask her to add your name to the list. She's happy to do that. Lastly, to help assure everyone's safety today, please remember to keep social distance as you exit and don't congregate just once you stand up. Try to spread out and move outside. Thank you, or out front. Thank you for being here, and thank you to everyone who made this service possible. And please, again, remember to drop your checks or cash in the offering basket as you depart. And now, returning to a spirit of reverence. May love and wisdom be in your mind. May love and courage be in your heart. May love and strength be in your hands. May Spirit be with you and work through you today and all your days. We extinguish our chalice with words by Elizabeth Sell Jones, listed as number 456 in our Singing the Living Tradition hymnal. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Annette now plays, excuse me. Annette will play our closing song. We can stretch out our hands without actually touching, both here and on Zoom. For safety's sake. Don't touch anyone you don't live with. Let's put it that way. Shalom, salam alaikum, blessed be, ashe, namaste, aho, and amen. Go from here in peace. $11:59.